Thank you, Radha ma'am, for that kind introduction. And let me just try share my screen. Yes, is my slides visible to everybody? And am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
And
Yes,
clear?
both clear, audible, and visible. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you. Just give me a moment. Right. So today I have been assigned to speak to you on GI symptoms. So the first session on GI symptom is going to be nausea and vomiting, and that is what we will be looking into today. So I know that most of you are working with patients in palliative care, or probably some of you might be seeing patients in receiving cancer treatment or after. And nausea and vomiting is a symptom which is not that uncommon. It is quite commonly seen. And you all must be managing nausea and vomiting in your clinical settings. Right. So this is what we will be looking into today in the coming 1 hour. We shall identify what are the reasons for nausea and vomiting and how we will be managing each of these. Right. So starting off with the case scenario. Okay. We are just going to meet this 54-year-old frail lady. Okay. And I just want you all to think about this case and keep it in your mind and think about how you would be managing it and what are the thoughts that come across in your mind, because we are going to come back to this case in the end of our session. And I want you to understand how differently are you able to think after this class. And that's exactly why I have put this slide in the beginning. We are not going to discuss this right now, but in the end. Okay. So this is a 54-year-old lady with CA stomach on chemo and was admitted in the general ward for treatment of UTI. Now she has vomiting, abdominal colic and fever, and she is very tired and has been admitted for completion of IV antibiotics. She also has small, frequent, incomplete bowel movements for 4 days and is started on laxatives. She's accompanied by her younger daughter. So I have, for ease, I have put the clue points in colors. So I want you to think about what are the issues that this lady is having here, and how would you investigate these issues and how would you manage them? I just want you to think about it and we will get back to this, right? So now coming to our discussion, I want you to use the chat box as frequently as possible because we are going to do a lot of talking here on the chat box. This is an absolutely interactive session, right? And nausea and vomiting being something so common, let us all put it on the chat box what we think, what we practice, what we have seen, because this is going to be a two-way learning. Okay, some things which you see at your center may not be seen in other centers. So this is a good platform to exchange our knowledge. So nausea and vomiting is something which is so common. And what are the common reasons, according to you, that can give rise to nausea and vomiting? Yes, it could be chemo. Aditi says chemo. It could be CA stomach. Okay, it could be the disease per se. It can be anything, urinary infection, like how Dr. Shanmuga Priya was saying, like how Dr. Saumya was saying, like how, yes, Dr. Sara says obstruction, yes, constipation, chemo, antibiotics, cirrhosis, radiation, mucosal barrier injury, or shock. Yes, we have lots of different reasons coming up. What are the causes of nausea and vomiting? And what do you usually give for these symptoms? Say for nausea or vomiting, when a patient comes to you and tells you, what is it that you prescribe? Yes, Dr. Aaron says ondansetron, Dr. Divya says ondansetron, Dr. Kavita says ondansetron, Dr. Aaron says PPIs. Yes, yes, Kavita says antacid, Dr. Malini says Dexa. Yes, Dr. Sara says 5-HT3 antagonist, yes, ondansetron. And Dr. Soumya says antibiotics. Yes, if it is UTI, you have to treat the UTI, and it's only by treating the UTI you're also going to be tackling the vomiting indirectly. So probably in antibiotic is also important there. Dr. Shivani says antacid. Yes. So we have our own ways of treating a patient who is coming with vomiting, with nausea and vomiting, isn't it? So then why are we having a 1-hour class to decide what antiemetic to give at which point and what are the different causes, which is going to give you a lead on which antiemetic to choose? Okay, so we also have other answers going here like IV fluids, which is important if the patient is having severe vomiting. Okay, agree. And Dr. Nikita also says haloperidol. Absolutely. In palliative care, we do use a lot of haloperidol for managing vomiting. Right. Now, moving on to the next slide. What is emesis? This is a defense mechanism of the body to remove toxic and harmful substances from the body after ingestion. And it is mainly nausea, retching, and vomiting. Right? So, what is the difference? Nausea, retching, and vomiting. Yes, Dr. Sujata also says that electrolyte to be looked into and potassium chloride can be replaced. Yes, if potassium is low and then there is stasis happening, and that could probably also be supplemented, is what she was meaning to say. Yes. So the question now is, what is the difference here? Nausea, retching, and vomiting. Oops. Nausea, retching, and vomiting. So nausea is just an unpleasant sensation. There is a need to vomit, is just an unpleasant sensation. The vomiting is not happening. But whereas in vomiting, there is a forceful expulsion of the gastric contents, where there is an associated contraction of the abdominal and chest wall muscles. In retching, all this muscular activity is happening, but it is against a closed glottis. So actually the gastric contents are not being expelled. So there's just a lot of sound. Now regurgitation is the act by which the food is brought back into the mouth without abdominal and diaphragmatic muscular activity, and it characterizes vomiting. So when your patient tells you that I am nauseous, I am feeling like vomiting, you need to know exactly, is it nausea, is it vomiting, is it retching, or is it regurgitation? Right? So what are the different types of vomiting? Can anybody tell me, can you all put in the chat box, and what do you think are the different types of vomiting? Have you heard of the different types of vomiting? Yes, Dr. Kavita says central. Yes. Okay, it could be projectile, like how Dr. Aiden, Dr. Saumya, and Dr. Harsharan was saying. And yes, Dr. Kasirangan, Dr. Sujata, everybody says yes, projectile vomiting. Dr. Sunny says bilious vomiting. Okay. Dr. Kasirangan says non-projectile. Yes, agreed by also Dr. Harshal. Yes, Soumya also says bilious, non-bilious. Okay. And what about with relation to time? With relation to time. Anything? Psychological. Yes, Dr. Sujata says psychological. Right. So let us see. We have something which is called as acute vomiting, delayed vomiting, breakthrough vomiting, refractory vomiting, anticipatory vomiting. Okay. Now, acute vomiting. Say, suppose the patient is given a heavily antiemetic cytotoxic drug. Okay, something like cisplatin. Okay, and vomiting starts off within minutes to hours. Now, generally, such highly emetic cytotoxics sometimes start resolving in about 24 hours. But whereas we also have some delayed vomiting agents, okay, that could actually trigger the vomiting after 24 hours. And it tends to be worst 48 to 72 hours later following the chemo. And this lasts for 7 days. So that is why mostly when after chemo, the oncologists tend to prescribe antiemetics for 3 days or probably a week because they want to address the delayed vomiting. Now, before a chemotherapy is given, because of the emetic potential of the chemo, the patient is given pre-medications like granisetron, also PPIs like pantoprazole or rabiprazole, or also sometimes in some places they are given ondansetron, tyrannosetron, whole range of antiemetics. This is to address the acute vomiting. So a chemotherapy can have acute vomiting, it can have delayed vomiting. You give pre-medications to address the acute vomiting. You give medications to the patient to take home, to take for say 3 days to 7 days to address the delayed vomiting. Now, what happens if you give the patient ondansetron 3 times a day and the patient is vomiting before he takes a noon dose? The patient takes his morning dose of Emicet or ondansetron and he is kind of okay. But say about by 11:30, 12 starts vomiting again before he can take the 1 o'clock dose. That is called breakthrough vomiting. Okay. Now, refractory is if you have the anti-emetic going, say metoclopramide. Metoclopramide, you can give it even 6th hourly. Sometimes we tend to go even as frequent as 4th hourly. So, say suppose you are giving it in the maximum frequency possible that can be given with the optimal dosage, and yet the patient is vomiting. This is refractory vomiting, unmanageable with current antiemetics. Okay, and again, then there is this set of patients who do not even want to think about the chemotherapy. They come into the ward, and even when they enter the lift, they start feeling nauseous. By the time they see the way to the chemo ward, they start vomiting. So this is anticipatory vomiting, a conditioned response prior to the chemotherapy. So what we need to understand is that managing each of this is different. So we need to identify when a patient tells, "Doctor, I have vomiting." Doctor, I have severe nausea and uncontrollable vomiting. You need to find out, is it acute? Is it delayed? Is it breakthrough? Is it refractory? Is it anticipatory? So most of the times what happens is that when your patient comes and tells you about feeling nauseous and having severe vomiting, we tend to take our pen and just prescribe an antiemetic. So this is where the change has to start. We need to start thinking deeper in multiple levels and identify to the point what exactly the patient is having. Okay, so why is it that we are thinking about, yes, vomiting, nausea, we have to control it? Okay, Dr. Premnath was also saying about spontaneous or induced. Thank you. So why is it so important to control vomiting? You can use the chat box. Why is it very important to control the vomiting? Yes, Dr. Adam says you could aspirate. Dr. Aditi says it's totally an unpleasant sensation. So you have to control it. So probably you're thinking about the complications. Yes, Dr. Shanmuga Priya also says about the dehydration. Dr. Sara agrees to it about the dehydration. Yes, Dr. Bandhan says to prevent electrolyte imbalance. Okay, we are all talking about the complications. Something else. Let's bring in more. Something related to the patient, about the patient. Yes, fluid and electrolyte disturbances. Dr. Sujata says the GI condition may worsen. Dr. Kasirangan says about how it could lead to fluid loss. Dr. Sara says about the comfort of the patient. And Dr. Sujata also says about the patient's satisfaction. And Dr. Shanmuga Priya also says it is very distressful for the patient. Yes. And yes, Aditi says that, Dr. Aditi says about the promotion of nutrition. And Dr. Soumya agrees to that. How will the patient even take food if the patient is having vomiting? And Dr. M. Subhash also agrees to that. But the benefit of oral intake. Now, the oral intake is going to be compromised. The quality of life of the patient is going to be compromised. Yes, Dr. Toma also says that the fluid loss and the electrolyte imbalance. So all at many levels of aspect, the quality of life of the patient is going to be compromised. And Dr. Nikita also brings up a very important point here, unable to take medicines. What if your patient was was a patient who was in severe pain and was on analgesic cover, and the patient is having severe nausea and vomiting, and because of the nausea and vomiting, unable to take any food, the patient thinks that I am not able to take any food. If I'm not taking food, I cannot take medicine either. It is going to harm me more. So the patient stops taking medicine also. Or probably even taking the analgesic, the patient is going to vomit. And in short, what happens is that the patient gets back his pain, right? Yes, like Dr. Sujata was saying, the patient and relative both become in panic, right? So there are so many reasons why we cannot take vomiting. Though so common, we cannot take it easy. It affects the patient's daily functioning, the quality of life, the non-compliance to cancer treatment. There are so many people who tell if they do not have adequately controlled vomiting, control of their vomiting, they say that I don't even want any more treatment. It's okay if I die, but I do not want to go ahead with my treatment. So, non-compliance to cancer treatment, refusal of effective pain medications, family distress. These are all points that you were talking about, right? Right. So now coming to the causes of nausea and vomiting. So there are different reasons or the different types, we can say, and then the related reasons why it is happening. So there is chemically induced nausea, there is gastric stasis, which can lead to vomiting. There can be distortion or stretch of the GI tract, which can lead to vomiting. Serosal irritation can lead to vomiting. Irritation of the GI tract can lead to vomiting. Raised intracranial pressure or movement associated anxiety induced environment. Most often we take it for granted about the environment. Many of the other causes, say like chemically induced nausea, okay, there is a whole lot of drugs like opioids, morphine. We have been talking about morphine. When you start morphine for a patient, for the first 2 to 3 days, you put an antiemetic. If it is an opioid naive patient, especially, and it's self-limiting, so you do not have to continue the antiemetic. Also, maybe some antibiotics, some cytotoxic chemotherapy drugs, all this. Maybe some toxins like food poisoning, ischemic bowels, gut obstruction, metabolic organ failure. Okay, all this can cause nausea, vomiting, okay, hypercalcemia, all these things. Now, gastric stasis. Okay, gastric stasis, sometimes it can be induced by drugs themselves, like anticholinergics. Anticholinergics, they are antispasmodics. So that can cause some stasis. Opioids, they can cause some stasis. Citis, peptic ulcer gastritis, okay, autonomic failures, all this. Now we were talking about the stretch of the GI tract, like constipation, intestinal obstruction, mesenteric mets, or also serosal irritation like the ureteric obstruction, and also some NSAID like drugs or infections that can irritate the GI tract. Now, we all know that increased intracranial pressure can cause projectile vomiting, which is very classical of traced ICT. Now, in our patients, mostly we see it among those who have cerebral edema or space occupying lesions or intracranial bleeds or even infections. And then vestibular disorders. Vestibular disorders, most of those patients who are having vertigo, or it can be because of different reasons that they develop vertigo. Could be infection, it could be sometimes even anemia, sometimes some movement induced. So they are also other reasons. Now, before, like how I had talked about that lady who walks into the hospital, the moment sees the lift, starts vomiting, that is anxiety induced, or what we call as anticipatory vomiting. And earlier that I was saying, the most taken for granted is the environment. If the patient is in the general ward and is lying close to the adjacent beds, and there is a person in the opposite in the adjacent bed who is having a colostomy or probably a diabetic foot, and there is a lot of fecal odor from one side, there is a lot of putrid odor from the diabetic food that is coming. All this can induce nausea. So even if there is a patient who is having a CA breast and there is a huge fungating ulcer on the breast, if the ulcer is not cleaned well, the smell itself can make the patient nauseous and unable to make the patient eat. Now, this is not just it. There are also many other important reasons why nausea can occur. Oral thrush, halitosis. How many times have you asked a patient when he comes with nausea and vomiting to open their mouth and look for oral candidiasis? Just 3 weeks back, I saw, I had a consultation of this 40 plus year old gentleman who was having severe vomiting and refractory, not being controlled with uh, two sets of antiemetics, okay, and they were wondering why and what is happening. But what was missed is that the patient was having candidiasis, oral candidiasis. The moment the patient was started on antifungals, the patient was started on fluconazole and oral candid mouth paint. So after the patient was given antifungals, the vomiting settled. So it is very important to also do oral examination when your patient talks about nausea and vomiting. Again, halitosis, good whether the patient is it depends on whether the patient is having good oral care. Dysphagia, dyspepsia, hiccups, it could be disease related, it could be some metabolic disturbances, mucositis. All this can be reasons why the patient is having nausea and vomiting. So as you can see, the management for each one of this is different. So one you are saying good oral care, one you are saying give antifungal. Hiccups you are managing in a different way. There's probably another reason to it. So mucositis also you are managing in a different way, right? So all this are the different reasons. You have to understand what is the reason for this vomiting. And after understanding what is the reason for this vomiting, then you choose the antiemetic. So that is why the first and foremost is identify the cause. Now, once if you identify the cause, you can identify the pathway which triggers the vomiting reflex. So once a pathway is understood, then you understand which is a neurotransmitter receptor that is involved. Now, once all this is done, all you need to do is choose the antiemetic which is a antagonist to that receptor. And then your route of administration, whether you want to give it orally or IV or subcutaneous, that depends on the patient. If your patient is not having severe vomiting, still able to have orally, always oral is the preferred. But if your patient is having severe vomiting, not able to tolerate anything orally, not able to retain anything orally, then IV or sub-Q is what you have to advise to your patient. Then again, very important, titrate the dose, monitor the patient, administer regularly. Do not give PRN basis for antiemetic. If your patient is having severe nausea and vomiting, it has to go round the clock. And once you have started your antiemetic, you have to come back to the patient 24 hours later at least. See if your patient is comfortable. Titrate the dose. If the patient is not comfortable with the TID, you can go for QID. Or sometimes you have to put in 1, 2 or 3 antiemetics. Okay. So this is just a diagrammatic representation showing what is the cause of the nausea and vomiting and which is the pathway involved, right? And which is the center that is affected, the receptors that is affected, and according to the receptor, we are going to choose the antiemetic. Okay, so like most common that we were talking about all this while, chemotherapy induced, let us say. So you are having a patient who has come to you with severe chemo-induced vomiting. Okay, so let us see where it is. In this, let us see, let me see if I can get my pointer. Okay, so you are talking about drugs including chemotherapy. Okay, so your patient is having severe nausea, vomiting induced by chemotherapy. So which is the area that is affected? It is here, the CTZ, right? So the CTZ is stimulated and further it sends signals to the vomiting center and emesis occurs, vomiting occurs, right? So now the receptors are depicted with colors as like how it is given below. So you have a yellow color here, you have a brown color here. The yellow color here represents 5-HT3 serotonin receptors in the CTZ, and the brown color represents dopamine receptors. So your patient's chemotherapy has gone and stimulated the CTZ where the serotonin receptors and the dopamine receptors are getting affected. Okay. So you can see that over here also in the gut also chemotherapy and radiotherapy are the which causes vomiting. It is the 5-HT3 that is mainly the receptor. Okay. And now let us see. We have found out the two receptors which are involved in chemotherapy patients, the reason for their vomiting. Now, how is that going to help us? Now, this is the chart that is going to help us. We found 5-HT3, okay? So, 5-HT3, we have here some sensitivity to metoclopramide, some to ondansetron, some to hyoscine butyl bromide, okay, and ondansetron, granisetron, okay, most commonly used, I'll say, and then also some antipsychotics like olanzapine, and now also mirtazapine has some action, okay, 5-HT3. So for your patients who are on chemotherapy and you want to control their vomiting, these are the group of drugs that are going to help you. Now also the dopamine receptors. Also the dopamine receptors where you have prochlorperazine, you have haloperidol, you have metoclopramide, okay, and these are all which are available here. So these also can be used to control chemo-induced vomiting. So this is how we decide when your patient comes to you with nausea and vomiting, you find out, identify which is the cause of the vomiting. Okay, like I said, you find out which is the cause, any of these, which is the cause of the vomiting. Think of this slide, which are the receptors involved. Once you identify the receptors, then you think about this chart and identify which is the best drugs for your patient. So like you see, it is not as simple as your patient walking in and writing an ondansetron. Now the route of the antiemetic, like I told you before, it depends on the patient's condition and preference. Oral route is usually the best and the easiest, but again, if it is severe, IV, subcutaneous or continuous subcutaneous infusions can also be given. So for patients in palliative care, mostly who have severe intractable vomiting, we sometimes do give continuous subcutaneous infusions. Right? So the patient, and it also helps for patients where IV access is very difficult. And most probably, severe vomiting, the patient, the veins, peripheral veins are more collapsed, and patient is very tired, and it's much easier to put a subcutaneous than putting a IV cannula. Okay, so suppositories, you can try different types: oral, IV, sub-Q, or suppositories, sublingual, transdermal patches. Okay, and very commonly also used for children who are taking chemotherapy. We do give ondansetron, little patches that can be put on the tongue. Mostly they are like fruit flavored. So children also like to take it. So like every other symptom management, we have non-pharmacological management and pharmacological management. So again, nausea and vomiting also has a non-pharmacological management part. Like I said, environment, we take it the most for granted. So make sure the patient has a lot of fresh air around, good ventilation, and if it is movement induced, try to, for such patients, you ask them to take bed rest, avoid movement. If it is halitosis, if it is oral thrush, good oropharyngeal hygiene. Nurse in the upright position. Sometimes patients may be having gastroesophageal reflexes, right? Or probably they have increased abdominal pressure because of constipation, ascites, multiple reasons, maybe mass or abdomen. All this can also lead to nausea, vomiting. So upright position is good. Maybe even a head and elevation, okay, 45 degrees. And avoid situations which could induce nausea and vomiting, and also suitable distractions. Okay, these are the non-pharmacological management of nausea and vomiting. So distraction, you can seek expert advice. That is, you will need psychologists for this. We may not be trained for such higher end procedures like self hypnosis, progressive muscle relaxation, biofeedback, okay, desensitization. Okay, now these are in particularly more helpful for anticipatory vomiting. They can be used alone or together with anti-vomiting drugs. Okay, so anticipatory vomiting does not mean that, okay, this is anticipatory vomiting, so I will give only anticipatory vomiting drug. No, you may have to combine it most often with other antiemetics. Okay, one of the just a quick example that came into my mind about how last month there was this one patient who was a young lady who came with severe anticipatory vomiting. Okay, and it is interesting that it is mostly women who have anticipatory vomiting. Okay, so this lady, she is a dance teacher, and she was having severe anticipatory vomiting. She just can't stand the sight of the ward or the hospital, and she came in for her chemo. So I was telling her, why don't you try this? You put on your earphones, listen to some dance music, and try choreograph the a dance move to that song in your mind as you are lying down for the chemo. So this was just a quick thing that came into my mind when I was talking right now about distraction. So similarly, these are small things like we can advise to the patient. And some places in the chemo wards and all that, there are magazines available, there are there are TVs available, or there is music that is put on. So there are different ways in which distractions can be given. Also, it is very important to tell the patient how they can eat and what they can eat and how frequent they can eat. So, if someone is having nausea and vomiting, definitely they are not going to be able to eat, isn't it? So, the patient is tired, the relative is panicking, saying that, oh, my mother is not eating or my father is not eating. So, what you advise them is eat small, frequent meals, maybe 2 hours apart. A plate for breakfast may have a certain quantity of food in it. Split that quantity and give that over a couple of hours, or try something else which represents that quantity in the next 2 hour later. So take small frequent quantity of meals rather than 3 large meals. Try consuming most foods during the daytime where the patients are able to eat better, and eat and drink food that is more easy on the stomach. Do not force feed when nauseated, and that is one of the worst. Where patient is feeling severely nauseous, the patient is not given proper antiemetics, but the relatives are so concerned that the patient is not eating anything. They try to force feed the patient, and that itself worsens the nausea. So, also it is seen that cold food may be better tolerated. Then avoid fatty food, spice, sweet food, and avoid carbonated drinks and fiber. Okay. But of course, there is mixed opinion about carbonated drinks, because some patients say that they feel better when they take some soda drinks. They are able to belch out a bit, and that helps to ease them better. So, if the patient is staying alone, probably with their spouse in the house, and is having to cook their own meals, that itself could be a reason for nausea. So, you can advise the patient for alternative solutions for the first 1 week. Maybe get in some help to cook food. Okay. And again, if the patient is on some strict diabetic diet or cardiac diet, small relaxations can be made during this time when they are like severely nauseous and having vomiting, because there is only a certain types of food that the patient will be able to have. So putting in these kind of restrictions may further kind of compromise their nutrition. And always get expert help. Okay, palliative care is all about multidisciplinary care. Okay, it is not about just a one-man show. Try to pitch in advice from a lot of experts, because in the end you have to treat your patient as a whole and in the best way possible. Also, we were talking about oral hygiene. So keep the mouth clean, do good oral care after each episode of vomiting, and not tight clothes. Ask them to wear loose fitting clothes. Nice flow of air, a fan or open window can be good. And sometimes even loud noises or some piercing light which is there in the room, very bright light, all that can be triggers. And certain smells, some pungent smells, that can also be triggers. Okay, so those kind of things have to be also made a note of, and it has to be kept in control. And also nausea, vomiting, like we said, we have to monitor, we have to titrate the dose. So give contact numbers to the patient or family to contact you or whoever is required or can help them out if their symptom is not adequately controlled. So nausea management guidelines would be: document the cause that you think is, and see if it is a reversible cause and what are the exacerbating factors in it. So if it is a reversible cause, you need to identify that and nullify that. If it is a constipation that is causing the nausea and vomiting, it is reversible. So give laxatives, open the bowels out. That will relieve the vomiting as well. If it is some drug, some NSAID which is causing gastric irritation, change the drug. Stop the NSAID, change the drug. Okay. And is there any exacerbating factors? The patient is already having some pain and chemo and all that. So there are some NSAIDs in one end that is probably that can be stopped. There is also this patient, the same patient who is having a urinary tract infection. So we know that urinary tract infection itself can cause vomiting. So we have to treat the exacerbating factor of that infection. So we have to understand what are the causes and treat each of them. And again, review the dose after 24 hours. And if the nausea and vomiting is persisting after 24 to 48 hours, most probably you have missed a cause. History taking is very important. Go back again to the patient. Ask for more vital information. There is something you have missed out, and that is why you are not able to control the vomiting. And remember that 1/3 of the patients will need more than one antiemetic. So if your patient is taking chemotherapy and is started on ondansetron 8 milligram 3 times daily and the vomiting is not controlled, the next medication on that prescription would be metoclopramide. Metoclopramide, again TID. Okay. So most of the patients will need more than one antiemetic, so that also has to be kept in mind. And if your patient is being controlled his emesis with the antiemetics given as IV, you have to, once the symptom is controlled, you have to change the IV to oral, and it is after 72 hours is what it can be done. Okay, so if your patient is having severe vomiting, you started the patient on IV ondansetron. Okay, after 72 hours, you have to consider changing it to oral, and then slowly taper down if you are able to bring the dose down once the symptom is completely if the cause for the symptom is removed or the time period, the delayed vomiting phase is over. Okay, but if the cause is persisting, the patient may have to be on antiemetic for a longer time. Yes. So antiemetics, the different types are anticholinergics. Okay, hyoscine butyl bromide is one of the also commonly used, buscopan, what is commonly called. It is also one of the commonly used medicines for vomiting. Now, buscopan is usually given in two situations. One, if the patient is having severe large volume of vomit, there is a lot of content in the vomitus. Okay, lot of water loss. So basically, hyoscine butyl bromide also acts as an anti-secretory agent. So it helps to bring down the volume loss. Okay, so it can also be given to patients who have severe abdominal colic along with vomiting. So it addresses both. Okay, now you have D2 receptor blockers. Okay, then you have prokinetic drugs. Now prokinetic drugs also commonly used: metoclopramide, domperidone, cisapride. Okay, now they all help in the forward motion. Now what has to be kept in mind is that do not combine anticholinergics and prokinetics because they tend to cancel each other. Okay. Now, NK1 receptor antagonists such as aprepitant and fosprepitant are drugs which are given for anticipatory vomiting. So, generally, aprepitant is the oral form, fosprepitant is the IV form. Aprepitant is it comes in a strip of 3, okay, 125 milligram, 80 milligram, 80 milligram. It's given on day 1, day 2, day 3. Okay, that's how it is given, and it has to be started to administer before the chemo is given. Then again, you have H1 antihistaminics. You also have 5-HT antagonists and adjuvant antiemetics. Adjuvant antiemetics are drugs which they themselves are not antiemetics, but they help to bring down emesis. Like dexamethasone, steroids indeed help to bring down emesis. Okay, not just for raise intracranial pressure, okay, but also in general they help to control vomiting, and also benzodiazepines can also be given. So some patients who have severe vomiting, we tend to give steroid tablets for the first 3 days, and also sometimes benzodiazepines, lorazepam, short-acting benzodiazepines can be given as HS dose for such patients. Okay, so this is the common antiemetics that are used. So how are these antiemetics generally given and their dosage? Haloperidol, commonly called Serenase, can be given for emesis at a dose of 1.5 to 5 milligram in a day. Okay, given as 8th hourly. Can also be given 6th hourly in severe cases. Then metoclopramide, again 10 to 30 milligram. Okay, and domperidone 10 to 30 milligram orally, TID or QID. Okay, ondansetron, okay, also can be given cisapride, then diphenhydramine, promethazine, okay, I think hydrobromide, octreotide are the medications which are commonly given for large volume vomiters. Okay, hyoscine butyl bromide and octreotide are drugs which can be given as anti-secretory when the patient has large volume vomiters. And again, dexamethasone, we had also seen, it is an adjuvant antiemetic. Now, with the information that we saw in the previous slides, is now that we come to our interactions and discussions. Okay, so here we come back to the 54-year-old lady. CA stomach, on chemotherapy, admitted in the ward with UTI. With what? Vomiting, abdominal colic, fever, and she is given antibiotic. Also has incomplete bowel movements for 4 days and is just started on laxative. And she is accompanied by her younger daughter. Okay. So what are the issues here? Yes, let's get to the chat box now. What are the issues here? Yes. Okay, the patient has CA, the patient is on chemo, the patient has UTI, and the patient has constipation. Yes. So all these are different reasons why the patient is having vomiting, nausea and vomiting, right? So there are so many different causes over here where each of them have to be given equal importance. So the patient is on antibiotics. So what about the others? Yes, only Dr. Soumya has put in her answer. What about the rest? Yes, Dr. Kasi Ranjan says bowel obstruction. Okay, the patient has not opened his bowel for 4 days. That also is a reason here. Okay. Anything else? Anything else which could be a reason for her vomiting? Rightly said, her CA could be a reason, her chemo could be a reason, her UTI could be a reason, her bowel obstruction, her constipation could be another reason. Yes, Dr. Anden says the antibiotic per se itself could be another reason. Anything else? Dr. Varsha says the cancer. Okay. Anything else other than these answers? Yes, Dr. Kavita says the anxiety. Yes, Dr. Saumi also agrees to it. She must be worried. What is happening to her? Anything else? Any indirect causes? Dr. Pushpa says UTI. Yes. Any indirect reasons? Okay, the patient is having abdominal colic. The environment. Yes. Dr. Jyoti says abdominal colic. Dr. Aiden says environment. I would like you to explore that a bit more. Dr. Harsharan also says that the patient may be worried. Yes, Dr. Soumya says being in a general ward, the environment, okay, we do not know, is there any other reasons why the patient is having severe nausea and vomiting, right? And Dr. Premnath was saying about optic, I couldn't get that. What induced? Sorry. Yes, Dr. Premnath, could you just type that once again? I was not able to understand. Optical induced? Okay, did you mean like the environment around was probably triggering it? Okay, then Dr. Shivani was also talking about the distortion in the GI tract. Yes, so here we do, I just wanted to also make you all think about the environment. Okay, so yes, psychological is also important, which we do not mostly think of. And again, the environment is also important. The patient is in a general ward, or maybe there is some foul smell that is coming, or maybe being a general ward, there is a common washroom that has to be used, and the patient is not able to walk. Maybe it is a younger daughter who has to take her, and she does not feel comfortable. She is having to hold her bowels, and this in turn is making the vomiting or the nauseous feeling worse. So there can be many hidden reasons which we need to explore, right? And so how are you going to investigate? How are we going to investigate? Serum electrolytes, that's wonderful. Yes, we have to look at the serum electrolytes if the patient is having any depletion, or if, is the constipation also because of any electrolyte imbalances? Yes. Rule out the triggering factors first. USG of the abdomen, Dr. Aditi would like to also do a USG of the abdomen. Is there some other reason? Okay, rule out the triggering factors first, Dr. Eden says. And Dr. Premnath says take a proper history. Yes, it is very important. There may be so many layers to the causes. We need to explore it. We are like detectives. We have to find out each and every reason. So remember that chart, that table. Your patient could be having more than 2 reasons or more than 3 reasons for the nausea and vomiting. It's not just one that I'm talking about. It can be even 2 or 3. Okay, so we need to explore the history, the case, and find out what are the reasons. And yes, again, clinical examination important. Do not miss any oral conditions which could be a contributory reason for the vomiting. Okay, and how would you manage? So how are you going to manage this patient? What would you like to give this patient for treatment? Yes. So the patient is having nausea, is having vomiting, abdominal colic, and fever, right? Okay. So Dr. Aditi says counseling. The patient could have some anxiety. Okay. Now, yes, Dr. Kasirangan says rule out the causes. Dr. Aditi says, okay, IV antiemetics. Okay, if the patient is not tolerating anything orally, then definitely IV. Or if the patient is able to take medications and retain some food, okay, you can also try anti-emetic, oral. IV fluids, if the patient is dehydrated, we have to. Fiber-rich diet. Yes, so fiber-rich diet, there are two ways to this to think. One, fiber-rich diet for a patient who is having vomiting, nausea, vomiting because of the increased abdominal pressure when the patient is having constipation. What the fiber actually does is that it increases the bulk of the stools. Okay, so because it increases also the bulk of the stools, and fibers are generally difficult to digest, this may sometimes worsen the nausea and vomiting. Okay, so in order to promote the bowel movement, we can suggest for other laxatives, preferably. Okay. Then, yes, Dr. Shivani says about electrolytes, and Dr. Soumya says also about enema to clear the bowels. Okay, right. So again, if your investigation results are showing any metabolic imbalances, try to correct them in your management. If your oral cavity examination is showing any positive findings, try to manage that as well. Okay, it may be for mucositis that you're treating, okay, or it may be for the candidiasis that you're treating with antifungals, okay, or those gargles that you're giving for your mucositis. So it can be any of these. Right. So that's well done. So let's move on to the next. Right. So now we have here another case scenario. Mr. Roy is a quadriplegic. So he's bedridden completely, who is given feeds through a nasogastric tube. He has presented with vomiting since 2 days and he is very sick. Now you are seeing him when you have gone for home care and visited him at home. So what could be the reason? He has a nasogastric tube, he is vomiting and he is very sick. What could be the reason? Yes. Okay, Dr. Pushpa was also talking about the parenteral antibiotic for UTI. And also Dr. Aditi was talking about the gastric stasis and disruption of the GE sphincter with regard to the previous one, I guess. Right? Yeah. So, yes. So, what about Mr. Roy? Now, let's talk about Mr. Roy. What is the reason that he has a Ryle's tube? He is vomiting and he has become very sick. Yes, Dr. Arden was saying it could be an obstruction. Yes. Dr. Soumya was saying whether it could be a paralytic ileus. Dr. Aditi says it could be a stasis. Dr. Kasirangan says it could be an NG tube position, very common. Dr. Aditi says infection. Dr. Anju Ann says check the magnesium level position, or check the nasogastric tube position. Yes. And Dr. Harsharan also says about the change the nasogastric tube. Dr. Bhargav says obstruction. Yes, Dr. Shivani says quadriplegic are more prone for uroglycal complications. Okay. So one of the commonly said things over here is it something to do with the nasogastric tube? Urological. Okay, yeah, thank you. So, yeah, you were suspecting that probably the patient has a UTI and that probably also is causing the vomiting, right? Okay, so these are all differential diagnoses that we are talking about, right? So each of you are correct in your own ways. So, because we have not investigated, we are not having the patient in front of us to examine and find out, we can only talk about differential diagnosis. So here, what I would also like to say is that this patient is vomiting. Now, what is the reason for the vomiting for a patient who has a nasogastric feed being given? It could be a block in the nasogastric tube, probably it is kinked, the position, it is out of position, or there are other reasons where there is a obstruction that has happened in the alimentary tract and the feed is not able to go through further. Or let me say, this is again very, very common, is our over enthusiastic relatives, caregivers overfeeding the patient. The patient is looking very sick. They are saying, today we are giving only, we are usually giving only 150 ml. Let us give 250 ml. So are they overfeeding the patient? And is that the reason why the patient is vomiting? So you need to find out, again, dissect each and every question that you are asking them and find out what exactly is the reason. How much ml of feed are you giving? When is the last feed that was given? When was the last time the feed went in through properly? When was the last time that when the feed was given and the patient started coughing? Is it that every time a feed is given, immediately the patient is vomiting, or the patient is vomiting only after some time? There are so many different questions which are going to lead you to the answer, and you do not need any investigation sometimes at bedside. Only these very crucial questions can lead you to the proper diagnosis. Patient and Dr. Kasirangan was talking about patient fear about bowel care. Okay, some patients, they are very scared about suppositories and enema, so that itself, okay, probably. And also sometimes it is voluntarily done in such a way. The caregivers are working. The patient has to wait for the caregiver to be also free to be given a bowel care or be given a suppository. So there are so many home cares that I have seen, the visits that I have gone for, that I have seen, that generally the suppositories or enemas are given once in 3 days, or sometimes even later. Why? Because the caregiver also has to be free. Once the bowel is evacuated, opened, the whole sheet, everything has to be changed. So the caregiver has to have time for all that. So they ideally choose twice in a week as a time. So that itself could have caused, the first day may be okay for the patient, second day may be okay for the patient, but by the third day, the patient starts developing increased abdominal pressure and nausea, vomiting. Patient is not eating. Okay, so this has to be educated to the caregiver. If you see symptoms like these, mind you, this is because he is constipated. So try to open the bowels, relieve the bowels. Okay, so as it is, like you said correctly, bedridden patients, the bowel movements may be decreased. So here, these are the possible reasons, and you have to give your suggestions accordingly. If it is to decrease the feed frequency or the volume, say like that, the patient is appearing sick. So examine the patient. Has the patient aspirated? Has it given rise to something like a pneumonia? So check for any chest signs, check for fever. Okay, and also, like you were saying, is it a UTI, a concomitant UTI that is there? Also check for some suprapubic tenderness or ask for dysuria. It can be anything. So you have to go through all the different things in that list, that checklist, okay, that table, and see what exactly is the cause and treat it accordingly. Okay. So to summarize, evaluate, manage, monitor, assure the patient, and when it comes to management, correct the correctable. So if there is something reversible, correct that first. Then non-pharmacological management, if possible, should be done. Pharmacological management or interventions also take a place. And again, in palliative care, it is not just the symptom, it is the individual as a whole, physical, psychological, spiritual, functional. All these symptoms have to be addressed together at the same time. So I have just put a few case scenarios here, okay, and Okay, I'm just going to take 3 minutes, okay, quickly. So just be with your chat box. We're just going to spend like very little time for each of this. Sita with pancreatic biliary cancer admitted for biliary stenting, presented with severe pain and vomiting, and is already on tramadol and Emicit. Would you like to say something over here? Tramadol, Emicit. Okay, there is probably a stent block. Okay, both have opposite action on 5-HT3. Okay, the tramadol and the the ondansetron tends to decrease the efficacy of tramadol. So that also can be a reason that the pain is not settled. And again, tramadol itself could be a reason for the vomiting, but again we have Emicit there. And then again, for severe pain, ask if the patient is on some anticholinergic. Okay, so that also has to be looked into. And if you are going to if you are going to add on another antiemetic, also check if it is not a anticholinergic that you're going to be combining it with. And if it is the tramadol that you want to change, do a opioid rotation. Okay, so assess the pain. If it is a colicky type pain, go for anticholinergics, but know which antiemetic to combine with it. Do not combine prokinetics with it. You can combine antiemetics like ondansetron or haloperidol, commonly used, right? And otherwise, if it is not a colicky pain, if it is a nociceptive pain, okay, tramadol, or you go for the higher, stronger opioid. Okay. Next one, Mary, treated for breast carcinoma, on follow-up, reports with severe migraine and vomiting for 1 week. What is it that you have to think of? CA breast, post-treatment, on follow-up, now with severe headache and vomiting. Yes, METs, always rule out brain metastasis. Thank you. So absolutely, you all are correct. If you have to rule out, say it how many years before it is. Always rule out brain metastasis. Okay. Do a clinical examination also. You can check the pupils, any asymmetry. Okay. Then Varsha with Hodgkin's lymphoma with severe vomiting, even at the site of the oncology ward when she comes for her chemotherapy. What are we looking at? Anticipatory vomiting, isn't it? Kutty Krishnan with CA prostate and diabetic, admitted for spinal cord compression, was referred for severe nausea and vomiting. Spinal cord compression with severe nausea and vomiting. Yes. Rule out DKA, okay. Yes, absolutely. Also, spinal cord compression with severe nausea and vomiting. Autonomic imbalance, raised ICT, raised ICT. We do have to keep all the checklist in our mind. Again, when you are seeing a spinal cord compression with severe nausea and vomiting, also think about how a spinal cord compression could also affect the anal canal, the bowel and the bladder. So ask the leading question about constipation. That is what I wanted to also bring out over here. Okay. Yes, decreased bowel movements, or it can also be metastasis to the brain. Can be anything. We are talking about, we do not know the case, is just one statement here. So all of you are right in your own ways. These are all differential diagnoses. I'm just trying to discuss one particular aspect of it, and that is why I have put this case. Madhavi Amma with advanced CA ovary admitted with constipation for 1 week duration has vomiting since 2 days. So someone with ovarian cancer having constipation for a week and is having vomiting, what is the first thought that should come to your mind? Bowel obstruction. Yes. Thank you, Aditi. Yes. So you have to think about malignant bowel obstruction. Yes, Dr. Bhargav also agrees to that because CA ovary is, malignant bowel obstructions are very commonly seen in CA ovary. Okay. Right. So that's done with the case scenarios. And I'm going to just stop share because we also have a case presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vinita, for taking us through the whole topic and finally giving some cases also, like a short rapid fire round, so that they have all had a quick revision also. Thank you very much. And as you mentioned, I think we'll go ahead with the case discussion. Sangeet, we can go ahead with the case discussion, please.
Good evening, everyone. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
So good evening. My name is Dr. Aditi Khare. I am a consultant anesthetist, intensivist, and a pain physician. I have my own pain clinic as of now. So we had a patient, Meena Singh, 72-year-old female. She was diagnosed with metastatic CA gallbladder, which was involving the liver, adjacent duodenum, and she had omental metastasis. Presenting complaints before diagnosis was dull aching pain in upper abdomen since 1 month, loss of appetite, loss of weight since 1 month, persistent nausea and occasional vomiting since 15 days. And post-diagnosis, now at presentation, she had difficulty in passing stool since 5 days. So history of present illness. Patient presented to a clinician 1 month back with dull aching pain in upper abdomen, aggravated on ingestion of solids and liquids. Pain was moderate in intensity at first, which progressed to severe pain since 15 days. This was followed by nausea since 15 days, intermittent vomiting, and loss of appetite. She visited a physician who advised ultrasound, on which a suspicious mass was seen. CT scan revealed findings suggestive of CA gallbladder, stage 4B. Plan of treatment formulated by the oncologist was palliative chemotherapy and overall general palliative care, including pain relief. Patient was started on tablet morphine 5 mg TDS by the treating oncologist 10 days back. Patient started 7 days back. Chemotherapy was awaited. Patient complains of difficulty in passing stools since the past 5 days. Patient was not taking morphine since 1 day, since the relatives had attributed constipation to morphine, and they had looked it up on Google. She was in severe pain at presentation and had not taken any food intake since 1 day due to fear of aggravation of pain. Patient also reported nausea at presentation. Next slide, please. On examination, her vitals were as follows. She was afebrile, pulse was around 100 per minute, respiratory rate 18 per minute. Blood pressure was 110/70, saturation was 96% on room air. Her pain score, however, was 10 on 10. GC was very poor. She barely weighed 35 kgs. KPS score was 60. Per abdomen, a stony hard mass was felt in the right upper quadrant of the abdomen, and there was some distension of the abdomen. Bowel sounds were found to be sluggish. Treatment and significant investigation, a complete hemogram and biochemistry and random blood sugar was also done to rule out any hypoglycemia since she was not eating anything. X-ray abdomen ruled out obstruction. Constipation was probably drug-induced due to morphine. So a rectal enema was administered to relieve constipation. Immediate release tablet morphine 5 milligrams was given to relieve severe pain, as the patient was, we did not have any backup for IV morphine and we had no availability. So we gave her tablet morphine, immediate release. IV antiemetic metoclopramide was given. She was already on ondansetron, so we gave her metoclopramide. Patient was prescribed a stronger laxative and was asked to report via phone call if constipation persists. She was asked to resume tablet morphine as pain relief allowed her to take oral intake, and she was reassured. Psychosocial aspects. Patient is a 72-year-old female with stage 4B gallbladder cancer. She is from an educated family, but she kept postponing visit to clinician, thinking that family members were too busy at work and that her problem was too small to trouble them. She had persistent nausea and her abdominal pain increased on eating, so she avoided eating. She felt weak and completely stopped her daily activities due to nausea, vomiting, which made her sad as she was thinking about the disease constantly. After diagnosis, caregivers were reluctant to start tablet morphine as they were worried about side effects. When pain could not be managed otherwise, morphine was started. After starting morphine, the patient felt better as the pain was now in control and she was able to eat. However, as soon as constipation developed, morphine was stopped and she was back in pain, not eating or drinking, which further worsened the constipation. The attempts at straining worsened her pain. The caregivers were worried that she might not be able to bear chemotherapy as she was very weak. Pain was given lesser importance over treatment of cancer. Medications were very basic: IV antiemetics, PPI, tablet morphine 5 mg for pain, per rectal enema, and a long-term prescription of laxative. So the main concerns here were that she is a 72-year-old female with CA gallbladder with omental metastasis and has nausea, vomiting, and severe pain. Depressed mood due to pain and unable to take meals, anxiety associated with pain after meal, reluctance to take morphine due to personal beliefs about bearing pain, and stigma of taking morphine. Morphine makes it unbearable but is now causing constipation, which is causing further significant distress. Caregivers, on the other hand, were more concerned about treatment and giving less importance to pain, thinking pain will deviate the subject of treatment. Patient worries about her causing trouble to her caregivers if she complains about the pain. So summary, 72-year-old female with CA gallbladder, stage 4B with pain, low mood, anxiety, and currently with constipation. Discussion points, I feel, were how can the patient be counseled that pain relief is important and side effects of painkillers can be dealt with, how the caregiver can be counseled that treatment of pain will not deviate the subject of the treatment, how to improve quality of life of patient by avoiding problems like nausea, vomiting, and constipation. Thank you.
Thank you, Aditi, so much. That was a very nice case and well presented. And here, now the discussion is open. The first question is, how can the patient be counseled that pain relief is important and side effects of pain be dealt with? And it is, so here, was the resistance from the patient or was it from the caregiver more, Dr. Aditi?
Ma'am, first of all, the patient, since she was a female from a village, she was more of the opinion that pain should be, pain sahan karna chahiye that way. And that it is not such an important thing that I have cancer and so I will have to undergo, have to bear pain. And morphine is a big stigma in villages that, patient has to take morphine means that is the end of life and all of those things. So the patient herself was avoiding morphine. On the other hand, caregivers hardly talked about her pain to the oncologist. Oncologists also are very busy people. They do not have so much time. And they did not find it important that they should be talking about such, even though the pain was so severe, they also did not feel like talking about it. So there was resistance from both sides.
Okay. So, what does everybody think? How can we deal with the patient's fears? How can the patient be counseled? Yes, the chat box. We have 54 participants. no answers. How can the patient be counseled? By building good rapport with the patient and her relative. Yes. And it needs more than one session to convince. Yes. Positive verbal communication. Absolutely.
Ma'am, one important thing I feel we should also inform the patient that pain relief is their right and they should ask for it.
Yeah. Yes, reassurance, boost the confidence, take her into confidence. We have so many answers coming up here. Thanks a lot. Yes, I think uh, before we start talking, we need to explore the thoughts about the pain. What is the meaning of pain for the patient, and we need to explore what is the meaning of, or what they think about taking medicines for them. So each person perceives each thing differently. So maybe the way how the patient thinks about the pain and the treatment may be different. What the caregiver thinks about the pain and the treatment is different. So only once you kind of understand, maybe this lady thinks that, God has given me this pain. So now I have to bear it. It becomes my karma to bear this pain, right? So these are a lot of myths and beliefs that we need to explore, and it's only once we identify each of these that we can we can get to each point and then try to uh, make them understand. And once we have, I think, yes, all of you have said about boosting her confidence, proper communication and the management of side effects, reassurance, talking to the caregiver, management of total pain. uh, I feel that the patient has to be talked separately too. Then after that, the team has to talk to the caregiver. Okay, each of their concerns have to be addressed about the disease and the treatment and the symptom management, such as pain. So both the sides we have to explore, and then have a family conference. Bring the caregivers next to the patient and then talk about things so that they are in a consensus. I think that is also very important, that the caregiver knows what exactly is in the mind of the patient, where we are breaking it open for them. We are giving a platform. Yes, and also Dr. Sujata was talking about the spiritual approach with medicine, meditation, which will divert from the symptoms. The non-pharmacological methods of dealing with the disease and the symptom. And definitely about telling them or educating them about medicines, medications, and the side effects, how that can be managed. So you're all absolutely right. And anything more to add on to how the patient can be counseled and how the caregiver can be counseled? Radha ma'am, anything that you would like to add into this?
Thank you, Dr. Vanitha. See, as you have said, no, like taking counseling sessions for each of them separately. Caregiver education. See, for them, it is the love and affection that they are telling treatment is important, pain is important. We have to teach them that treatment is equally important, pain. See, we may have to just tell them the pain is like improving the quality of life of the person. See, their whole love is for that person. And for them, just not knowing the importance, it's just raising awareness. So as you mentioned, we may have to do sessions separately, and time factor, but we also have to tell them that in end result, no, as a whole, taking the person as a whole, and informing them that by treating her pain, she will agree for her treatment. So many times, as you mentioned through your discussion today, many patients, even recently, I have one patient who is refusing to go for radiation because of the side effects. We have spoken to him few times, but he says, no, I have struggled with the pain and everything. So like that, we have to inform them that you have to give equal importance. Both are equally important, symptom management and the corrective or disease management. So, and then always multidisciplinary. If need be, involve the psychologist also, just a couple of sessions. So it's the fear, anxiety, apprehension, and then the love. So extra love and affection is what is going there. So that is the main thing: multimodal approach and multidisciplinary management.
Yes.
Those were the things. And see, and last is how to improve the quality of patient. If you do all this, automatically quality of patient is going to improve. Exactly. So that's what, see, very good, lovely responses. Everyone interacted and everyone gave in all their inputs. No? So that is overall management, I think. And see, if you treat total pain, no? Psychological, spiritual aspects are covered, and if you can involve the social worker team, if there's any options of giving some financial support and things, what is available for them. If they were not aware, there may be some schemes, some government schemes are all there, which they may not be aware. Coming from a village, they may not know, so someone could guide them, and that could enable her to get some funds or help
And
from
many a
that
times,
front also.
sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
Many a times I have also noticed in practice that, when patients refuse or caregivers refuse, there is always a reason for it. They probably have some associated memories or something they are relating it to of someone they have known or they have heard of. So they don't want treatment. Probably they are relating it to some other person who they know have taken the treatment and have had a extremely terrible course of treatment. Maybe it was not even the same disease. So we need to explore those areas also and make them understand that that is a totally different disease and each individual responds in a different way. So I think that is also important.
Yeah, exactly. See, in the beginning, I think to start off itself, when this case discussion started, you did mention that we have to find out what is that's bothering them. So that is what we always say. No, it could be whatever symptom. We have to ask them, why are they scared? Why is that they are telling no to all this? So it is not that, like, never assume what we say. So we have to find out and get the information from their mouth. So it may be totally unrelated to what you will be thinking, or you will be like, even like something what we would come to our thought, that may not be the reason. So many times we say, for example, for someone they'll be in severe pain, but when you go sit and ask, they're worried that, for example, who has a very young family, children who have to go to school, not being able to fund for their education will be making their pain 10. So these type of things. So other factors, that total management, no, giving importance to physical, psychological, social, spiritual, everything. So we can't say physical alone is being the cause. So the same approach for everything, but even though it's the same approach, you have to put, for example, if it is GSM, then you have to go into what are the probable causes for the GI. Is it just the anxiety, or is it, as we said, no, is it something else going around which is causing it? Or is it the physical symptom or the drug? But, and all these, no, what we know as causes have to be explained to them in simple terms. So that will help them. So raising awareness in all forms is so important, and it can be done in some simple way. No need to conduct the whole session for them, but in a simplified form. So if we are aware of all these things, when we are aware, we will be able to put it across in the simple language comfortable for them. That is what will be helpful. Really good. See, when we do the case discussion or in the session itself, we have some cases. When you bring up the case, everyone is able to relate it. See, that's how when the case discussion came up, so many messages came up on the chat. So that is how the interactive session also helps to deal in more detail. Anything anybody wants to ask other than all this, no, you can unmute and ask also now. If you want to, you can, anyone has any other query specific or something like that, you can unmute and ask now. Okay, if not, a big thank you, Dr. Vinita. It was excellent. Like you took us through in such a methodical fashion and cost management, multiple options of management, everything. So, as you said, no, this nausea vomiting is a very common symptom, but it's also a symptom which is sometimes very difficult to manage, also, even though in many fields. So, and then always thinking of pharmacological, non-pharmacological, and adjuvant. Adjuvants do have a very good role. Please, many times adjuvants have been the agent which helps to stop. So, with practical experience, we do say, I'm also one of the I've been an anesthetist for a long time, and adjuvants do give us a very helping hand in many situations. So do remember that adjuvants also can be helpful, and to keep that in mind. So thank you very much, Dr. Vinita. I'll hand it over to Sangeet.
Thank you so much, everybody. You all have been so interactive. It's been a wonderful time taking this class. All the best.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for taking the wonderful session. Thank you, Radha ma'am, for facilitating the session. Thank you all for participating actively during the sessions. Thank you. Let's see in the next session. Bye.
Thank you.